Consciousness shapes conditions. In other words, ideas shape the world. In my previous video, for anyone that has seen it, knows that I said the opposite, that it is conditions that shape consciousness. Now I am making a different claim. And I'm doing this because I strongly think it to be true, to be a good thing, that if you are searching for any kind of truth, you must consider the opposite claim to be true. The mark of an educated man is the ability to toy around with any idea without fully accepting it. So in other words, you must consider the possibility that you are wrong, that your claim is incorrect, whatever that claim is. And I think that this is the biggest problem of humanity, is the fact that people don't consider themselves wrong as often as they ought to. They're so convinced, and too often, that they are right. Is this not the definition of ignorance? When you're so hard stone certain that you are right. When you're so convinced that you are definitely right. Is this not ignorance? It is wholeheartedly anti-science, which rests on the idea, on the foundation that there is a possibility that you're wrong. So now one may come to conclusions and even defend a position that they came to, but it must be somewhere the case, somewhere acknowledged that you have considered the opposite point of view to be true before you are fully hard-headed certain in your position. And this way of thinking, this sort of understanding, this method of thinking, it's good philosophy, and it has a name. It's what's called dialectics, or dialectic thinking, the dialectic method. When you have a thesis, an antithesis, and you somehow synthesize them together, a synthesis. It's when you put two truths head to head. It's when you put two truths in tension with one another, and then you see what comes out of it. Not by ignoring the opposite, but by grappling with it, dealing with it, and forming something new, evolving your view. It's unfortunate that this view is not really as popular as the debate style that we see, or at least I see, on YouTube and in the academic world. Debates use emotional appeal, manipulation of language. Two people going head to head, coming in already with a preformed view, is such a bad spirit of trying to find the truth about something. This is not good. I think that this kind of thinking, the dialectic kind of thinking, should be more promoted and should be more common. Plato wrote his books with his students arguing with one another, not as a debate that they know this is the claim, but rather consider my view. Where are the gaps in this position that I'm taking? You want to come in with another person, not saying, hey, look, I'm right, but rather, please show me, where am I wrong? I want to know another viewpoint, another possible truth. I want to bring a little side note of kind of vague connection to, again, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. At this point, I think I mentioned this in every single video. Gödel's incompleteness theorem states that any formal system powerful enough to describe arithmetic cannot prove itself to be free from any contradictions from within itself. So any mathematical system cannot prove its own consistency, cannot prove using the same math that it doesn't have any contradictions in the system. It's a really puzzling thought. It's a really interesting result. And this result, along with, in physics, the uncertainty principle, for me is in the spirit, in the flavor, that there's limitations to your knowledge. It's another proof that you should not be certain about whatever claim you're making. You don't know. You do not know. And yet, this bothers me, because then how can people make such claims that they know anything about God or morality or what's right or what's wrong? Religious systems don't offer this kind of thinking. They are rigid in stone. We know this to be true, and that's that. Ideologies, political, social, whatever ideologies, also hold this kind of dogma, this sort of, this is the truth and it's unbreakable. In my view, this must be a form of ignorance. I don't know how to say otherwise. Now, back to the idea, the opposite idea that I want to present. The idea that consciousness shapes conditions. If I was to present this idea, I would go along these lines. I would say that revolutions, they don't start with violence. They start with a shift in thinking. In other words, before any change happens, the change happens in how people see themselves. So, for example, something like the French Revolution. This was guided by a slogan: Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Freedom, equality, brotherhood. This was a new vision, a new idea that spread across the masses and caused a change of the society, of the government, of how people govern themselves, view themselves, treat themselves. Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau gave people new ideas of this flavor. The idea that all humans have rights, this kind of moral consciousness, it comes from the Enlightenment viewers. So people like Kant and Paine, they laid down the work for the abolitionist movement. So this consciousness stuff that changes conditions, consciousness is what lets people name their oppression and then imagine something different. A condition can be awful, but if no one sees it, no change will happen. This is what I would go about drafting if I was to take the position of a person defending that consciousness shape conditions. I'm curious to hear people's thoughts though. And I'm of course specifically located on a social level, specifically saying that it is either economics that shapes our worldview or ideas, things like religion and education, that shape how society evolves. Both points are fair and both points do have truths, but I am conflicted with this question. Where do the ideas come from in the first place? This is where I cannot really understand the claim that consciousness shapes conditions. And the conclusion, the synthesis that I come to, is that it ought to be the case that conditions shape consciousness is still a more valuable statement, a statement that carries more weight than that consciousness shapes conditions. Even though consciousness does shape conditions, my video to you somehow influences you and you might do certain actions in one direction or another direction. So it is true that, for example, people have emotional states about certain things that happen, certain feelings that might motivate an individual to do one thing or orient entire groups to alter history a particular way. I'm not denying this claim. There is some truth to this claim, but still it's fundamentally rooted in some physical conditions that are external to the mind. If no one ever suffered, no one would need to imagine the concept of freedom. Pain creates the condition of liberation. And that pain, first and foremost, comes from the physical. So again, the dialectic synthesis that I come to is one that simply places more weight towards materialism, not towards idealism. conditions shape the world. So to summarize, in this video, there are two main things that I want to present. The first is acknowledgement that whatever claim I made or am making or will make, I have considered the opposite claim. Considered it without any emotion initially in it. And in other words, I am very much open to being wrong. And you'll see that in future videos, some of the claims that I might be making will be surprisingly bold, given the fact that I carry this statement to be very, 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 very important. The fact that you cannot have any initial emotional, not to say you can't have an emotional position on something, but you have to be conscious where the fact that it is an emotional position of who you are versus the fact that you can consider any claim to be true. And you could toy around with any claim, even some very awful, scary, terrifying ones. Because I think that one should have the courage to, if they want to know the truth, they should be able to toy around with any idea. And so this kind of thinking where you consider truth and anti-truth and somehow synthesize them, and this being called dialectics, is what I wanted to present in this video. And that this method of, this debate method that uses manipulation of language and emotional appeal is definitely trumped by the dialectic method, which unfortunately is less popular. And the second main idea I wanted to present is the specific conclusion that I came to from considering both sides. That even though consciousness shaping conditions does hold some truth, it makes more sense to give more weight to the fact that conditions shape consciousness. In other words, that economics shape your worldview, your understanding of reality. It is economics that determines truths. Religious truths, political truths, social truths, and moral and personal truths as well. And only by being conscious of this fact can we make a change in the society.